want to start today by telling a story that I think perfectly exemplifies my love of the English language and my constant quest to expand my vocabulary. According to my mother, obviously I don't remember, I was speaking in full compound sentences by 13 months old. That's pretty young to be speaking that way, and don't worry, there's plenty of subjects I'm really bad at, but language has always been something that fascinates me. This story takes place at my family cottage, and I was probably around 4 or 5 years old. My little cousin was just a baby, and like most babies, she had a pacifier, otherwise known as a soother, in her mouth. And again, like babies, she started to cry, and the pacifier popped out and it fell on the floor at our cottage. Now, her dad was right there to pick up the soother, and according to all the adults present, I very sternly looked my uncle in the eye and said, "You better sterilize that." The reason I'm telling this story is because I love language, and I wanted to talk a little bit about slang and why I find it so cringy when certain people use what I'll refer to as TikTok slang. I'm not going to sit here and be a stick in the mud about the slang that the kids use these days. That's not my point at all. In fact, as far back as humans have had complex language, children have developed their own little slang terms. That's literally always been a thing. I also personally reject anyone who is opposed to new words entering the lexicon. That's ridiculous. Language is practically alive. It's something that is never stagnant. Words are being added all the time. And hey, I'm not gonna say that it's not sometimes annoying or embarrassing when you don't know what a word means, but you know, that's not an excuse to say that no new words should ever exist ever. Also, I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone here that English is a language made up of other languages. There is no world where English isn't full of just invented words that were mushed together or taken completely from other languages. Obviously, I've given you examples of how I love learning new words, but that doesn't apply to just new English words. I mean, I love learning new words, especially words connected to fandoms. The world of drag is a perfect example of a fandom and community that developed all kinds of new terminology to refer to specific things. If anyone here has watched RuPaul's Drag Race, you know that there are all kinds of fun terms that drag queens use to specifically refer to things in the drag world. Things like kiki or kai kai.
Kiki wanna kai kai, but none of these queens are my type.
K-pop is another example very near and dear to my heart that uses a lot of fandom terminology.
Let's go!
Obviously, some of the slang is taken from Korean words, but for some of the things, they're just fandom terms. Things like stan, for example. That was something I only learned when I got into K-pop. The point is, I'm not against slang. So why do I find TikTok slang so cringy? The answer, simplistically, is that a lot of modern slang is taken from Black people or African American vernacular English, AAVE. Before I go on, I'm sure you might be wondering, why am I talking about this? Is it my place to talk about this? And I'm not trying to be a white knight, either figuratively or literally, but if my upbringing has taught me anything, it's that it can be really hard to learn this kind of stuff when you're stuck in a bubble. And believe me, when I was growing up, I had very little exposure to people of color, and it showed. and I had to go out of my way to learn this stuff, and I think it's important that I bring it up with everybody. Obviously, throughout this video, I'm going to be quoting and referring to works by people of color, specifically Black Americans, and I will be linking them in the description where applicable, and I highly encourage you to look at the full works and seek out your own as well. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I've never used cringy vocabulary in my life. That would obviously be a lie. Some of this slang is already so deep into the lexicon that it's not realistic to expect people to stop using it. But I did just want to point out some of the more egregious examples, personally, I think, that make white adults in their 20s and 30s sound like they're trying to be black. Lost the plot, cooked, unk, fam, bad take, lit. I know some of those are not exactly brand new, but they are the ones that occurred to me the most. When I hear them, they just make me... And I couldn't put my finger on it for the longest time because I suppose there's nothing inherently harmful with any of those terms. But please continue watching the video so you can at least see where I'm coming from here. I know maybe some of you are already feeling a little bit defensive because you use those words all the time and you think I might be suggesting that you're racist. Believe me, that's not the case. However, I do want you to challenge that feeling of defensiveness. I'm going to read you a quote from this book right here by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, PhD. It's a fantastic read, highly recommend. The cognitive dissonance that results is part of the discomfort that is experienced at this point in the process of development. Responses to this discomfort may include denying the validity of the information that is being presented or psychologically or physically withdrawing from it. The logic is, if I don't read about racism, talk about racism, watch those documentaries or special news programs, or spend time with those people of color, I won't have to feel uncomfortable. The desire to withdraw physically or psychologically to avoid the discomfort is a symptom of what Robin DiAngelo has called white fragility. In essence, a low tolerance for the cognitive and emotional stress that comes from exposure to new information that disrupts one's sense of racial equilibrium. In the spirit of being open and honest about these kinds of things, I'd like to tell you another story, one where I had to reckon with exactly this kind of discomfort. Many moons ago, I ran a very tiny local theater production, and as director, I would occasionally need to put out calls for new cast members. During one such call, I had posted on social media and received a message from a wonderful person who happened to be Black. I bring this up because when they contacted me interested in auditioning, they asked, is it okay that I'm Black? And to be honest, I had never even considered that our entire cast was white people, but it was. And it wasn't a decision, but this is what I mean about the bubble. You get trapped in these social circles, and the longer you go without exposure, the less you understand. Anyways, that person aced their audition and they were with us until the end of that production. They were fantastic and I will always have great memories of their time with us. But that experience will also always sit with me because the very fact that I hadn't even thought what it might be like for a Black person to join an all-white cast is sort of endemic of the problem, right? And the truth is, it's okay to sit with discomfort. In fact, the discomfort that I had to sit with about that experience is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the kind of discomfort that a person of color has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So if I can do it, I believe in you, and I believe you can do it too. Next, I'd like to bring in some perspective from one of my favorite video essayists on the platform, FD Signifier. I'm going to be quoting from his video, How Not to Be an Ally. Honestly, please go watch the whole video. I'm going to be linking to it because honestly, at a certain point, I could just quote the entire thing. To oversimplify the video, the general conceit is looking at the types of tropes in TV and movies regarding the white friend or savior of black characters. One of the main through lines of this video is Feek and the other experts he's speaking to discussing the movie Django Unchained. The reason they use this movie as a through line is because the Christoph Waltz character is a very good example of the kind of white savior trope that they were examining in the video. One of the experts in the video, Justin Ponder, who at the time of recording at least was the CIO of Uplifting Impact, had some great thoughts on this.
Humility. Like you would hear a whole lot of people being fervent about, I need to be radical, I need to be extreme, I need to be out there, but then they charge and they shoot Calvin Candy and they make the situation worse for Django and Brunhilde. There's something about humility. So there is some virtue to what Schultz did. However, it became clear that it was more about his dignity, it was more about his self-image, it was more about what he thought was right than what was beneficial for others. We get that a lot in our work, where it's very difficult, being told over and over by Schultzes that we're not fighting the candies enough.
What I'm trying to get at here is actually best put by Feek in that video as well.
One thing that has to be understood that's going to come up over and over again in this video is that being an ally should never be about you. The intimacy breeds maybe complacency. The concept of being an ally is subsumed into that intimate bond, and then that familiarity, the actual struggle of the people close to you, you lose track of that. And the very real stakes that are in play for the people that are marginalized that don't fully affect you, you don't see it. The homie ally is so immersed in the community, so in love with the fact that they've been accepted, that they lose track as to what really aligning yourself with this group might mean. And in doing that, you also lose track of how outsiders, how the outside dominant culture views you versus them in any given situation. And in those situations, it becomes so important for you to feel aligned with these people that you forget all the different ways that you can help a situation or help avoid a situation.
So I get it. The words are popular on TikTok. Everybody's using them. They get in your head, and before you know it, they're just part of your speech. I'm not here to chastise you for that. However, I do want you to think back to the past. Look at some of the most popular slang from the 90s into the 2010s. You go girl, da bomb, dog, bling, basic, turnt, I can't even, yes. If you're young and you just cringed hard hearing any or all of those terms, I just want to remind you that back then, those were the coolest terms. That was the TikTok slang, if TikTok had been a thing back then. To expand on this thought, I'm going to read you a quote from Lauren Michelle Jackson, the author of this book, which I also highly recommend that you read. To provide some quick context for this quote, in the chapter it's from, the author discusses how Time, the magazine, used to have a word of the year list. This devolved into a what word should be banned this year list. Time eventually gave it up. However, it was continued on by an organization called LSSU. In 2015, the which word should be banned poll included the word feminist. So keep that in mind when you're reading this quote. LSU's banished word list has always been an exercise conducted tongue firmly in cheek, as per its full name. List of words banished from the Queen's English for misuse, overuse, and general uselessness. Nobody with common sense expects words to evaporate because someone, or even a group of someone, wants it so. But across the 43 years of LSSU's archive, something disquieting emerges too. It starts in the 90s when phrases like "you go girl" and "da bomb" enter the frame, and later "dog" and "bling." The common feature of these additions grows more glaring in the 2010s. The list, with few exceptions, curated words derived from Black and feminized speech. Neither would know these words enough to be sick of them were it not for the curse destined to hound Black culture wherever it goes. The curse of capital C cool. The curse is cyclical, like all good curses, for the desires that drive acquisition also immolate the object of desire. Cool isn't cool if everybody does it. Personally, to me, it doesn't feel very good that white people in North America are taking the language of Black Americans, then overusing it to the point where they decide they're sick of it and then want it eradicated from use. Actually, another white person who I think has a really good take on this subject is actually comedian Eliza Schlesinger. In her special Hot Forever,
I call it glitter speak. You've seen it splayed across RBG totes and Michelle Obama on a unicorn wine bottles. You've seen this language. Yes, sassy bitch, sassy AF, work queen, yes girl, twerk it mama, rose all day, thick with 3 C's, working and twerking. Yes, twerk queen mama, thick raccoon bitch, do it all day, bubblegum mama face. Yes queen, work bitch, slay all day mama. They stole this language from Black gay trans drag queens and made it their own to sell you pencil bags.
And we obviously can't talk about repackaging Black culture without talking about something I brought up earlier, which is K-pop. K-pop, as it stands, would not exist without hip-hop music. It is very much based on the idea of repackaging Black culture. If you're a big fan of BTS like I am, then you probably remember in the early days that Namjoon spoke with a bit of an affectation in his voice that one could argue was trying to imitate American Blackness. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and make excuses just because BTS are my faves or whatever. I did just want to bring up that in Namjoon's case specifically, the way he learns language is by listening. Quite famously, he taught himself how to speak English by rewatching Friends DVDs because there's so much of it, and he was able to kind of absorb it that way. You could also see it when BTS was doing world tours. Every time they would go to somewhere like the UK, where the hosts would have an accent of some kind, you could hear Namjoon picking up their accent as the interview went on. So in that specific case, again, not an excuse, but I did just want to bring up that a lot of people have criticized Namjoon specifically for his attempts to be Black. And actually, I probably have more criticism of his hairstyles, especially the dreadlocks, than I do with that early way of speaking. He doesn't do that anymore. Ultimately, what all of this boils down to is selling Black culture without Black people. And you're free to disagree with me. I would love to know what you think. You can let me know in the comments. You can send me a message. But if you do disagree with me, particularly about the slang and the using of the slang, I would just like to read you one more quote that I actually also lifted from FD Signifier's How Not to Be an Ally video. I told you I could quote the entire thing, so go watch it after this.
Like, how much do you like to be right?
Mm.
That, like, if you on a 0 to 10, you really like to be right, it's going to be very hard for you to be an ally. Like at the 7, 8, 9, 10 mark, you don't know how to hear people, you don't know how to connect with people. You have an idea in your mind about what right is that you've established through who knows what, and it's going to be really hard to change. And allyship has to be more flexible than that. And I think most people get stuck because they want to be right. And so whatever the thing is they want to be right about, they will go hard on it, but sometimes you need to learn some other things.
To wrap things up here, I know that I'm hardly an authority on this subject, which is why I encourage you to not only look at the sources that I've linked in the description, but to go out and seek your own and spend more time with people outside of your little personal bubbles. You'd be surprised at the kind of empathy you can develop. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to my opinion, and I hope to hear from you and see you next time.